The webinar today is about online and blended teaching and learning. And we are going to talk about challenges and strategies in Africa. Now, why we need this webinar, or why we need to talk about something related to education, specifically online education, and again, especially limited to Africa. We all are working in Africa for a long time. BlueCrest College is in African region for last 20 years. And we know the education industry landscape in the region. Now, what happened, we all know in the education industry because of the COVID-19 situation. Suddenly and instantly, almost all the education institutions in the whole world had to shift to online education. And all of these educational institutions were at different stage of their preparedness for shifting to online. Some institutions were more prepared than others, but many institutions were not ready for online education. But there was no other option, but every institution has to shift to online education now. Now, because of this demand to shift to online, we have observed a lot of gaps and issues which actually are impacting the high quality delivery of education online, and also it impacts the effectiveness of online education. And these concerns are very specific and peculiar to the African region. And we can see there are other seminars and webinars which are already going on about the online education. But I think this is the first webinar we are organizing here in Africa that is from the viewpoint and perspectives of all the stakeholders in the online education. So we are going to talk about the perspectives of educators, students, perspectives of institutions, regulators, and government also. So we have the themes and areas of discussion which we will be dealing with. Now the format of this webinar will be that our speakers or the panelists will get a chance one by one to present their viewpoints, and all the questions and answer sessions will be taken care of at the end of all the presentations. So if you have some questions, I think the best option for all the attendees is to select the option of Q&A. You can see the tab of Q&A in the Zoom interactive panel in front of you. If you click Q&A, you will be able to write your questions there. And please feel free to write the questions for general, or you can direct the questions to any of the panelists by saying that this question is for Ms. Liz or for Ms. Nadumo or for other panelists, and you can ask any question you want. And as the whole panel, we will try to answer all of your questions. And after the question and answer sessions, if the time permits, we may allow some of the attendees to ask some oral questions also on the Zoom. So please use Q&A panel. The Q&A tab is there for question and answers. So there are 4 major themes for this particular webinar, and it covers all the perspectives and all the aspects of online education. For example, the first one is to accelerate online and blended teaching and learning in Africa. We all know that many African countries, if we compare from other regions in the world, they are not yet ready for online and blended teaching and learning. Many African countries are still facing a lot of issues in infrastructure or in having a lack of exposure and experience in the online education. Second theme is about how to prepare the regulators and government for online and blended education. When we say Africa is not yet ready, it's not only about the readiness of the industry from the viewpoint of institutions or educators or the students. Even our regulators and government in this region are not yet ready and prepared for online and blended education. So there's a lot we need to do from the perspective of regulators and government also. And very importantly, how students should be oriented to adopt online and blended learning. This is again another issue which we have been seeing when we shifted to online teaching and learning. The last area of discussion is about educators. Are educators accepting online and blended teaching in Africa? There is a very mixed kind of adoption we can see, and we can still see because many educators in Africa, they have little to no exposure and experience in online education. That is why there is a lot of reluctance and there is a lack of, you can say, the readiness to accept online and blended teaching in Africa. That is why we can see there are a lot of fears and challenges for educators also. So we need to discuss this. Now, when we discuss these 4 different themes and 4 areas, it will help us to find out ways and means to create a positive impact in this region based on the outcome of this discussion and insights we are going to get from this webinar. We have 4 panel members in the webinar today. Let me introduce the first panel member, Ms. Nodumo. She is the Director of ICT Services, Communications and Knowledge Management at Association of African Universities. She has 25 years experience in different sectors: secondary school education, banking, railway transport, higher education, and tertiary agricultural education. She has worked at African University in Zimbabwe and the regional universities Forum for Capacity Building in Agriculture in Uganda. I do not know much about RU Forum, so maybe Ms. Nodumo can actually explain a little bit more about this capacity building forum. It seems very interesting. And also she has experience in Africa University, where she led the implementation of e-learning. Ms. Nodumo is going to talk and provide us insights about how to accelerate online and blended teaching and learning. After this particular presentation, we have 3 more panel members. Dr. Fred is the President and Provost of Academic City College in Accra, which is one of our sister universities in the region. He is also the founding Dean of Engineering at Aseshi University, and he worked as Vice President of New Product Development at Jones Healthcare in US and held various roles of high responsibilities and increasing responsibilities for some Fortune 500 companies. He has also worked as Director for R&D and Director of IT at Siemens Medical, and as Worldwide Director R&D and Director of Market Development at Becton Dickinson and Company. He has received some very respected and honorable awards, and we are very fortunate to have such a personality with us today. He has received the 2008 US Black Engineer of the Year Award, which is the most promising scientist award. Also 2008 NJ Innovator Hero Award. He is also a co-inventor on 22 issued US patents and has numerous publications. So Dr. Fred will be providing insights about how to prepare the regulators and government for online and blended education. The third panel member we have is Ms. Liz Keable. Ms. Liz is from UK. She is a success coach with a focus on convincing the students on how can the students achieve higher grades in their studies by changing their self-concept. So this is a very important perspective for all of us, because online education can never be successful if the students are not ready for it. She is very passionate about effective teaching and learning. She is a biologist with a fascination for how the brain learns, and she has been a teacher with experience of special needs, trauma, and gifted education. She has been a training course provider for teaching staff and their assistants also. So I'm welcoming Ms. Liz also, and she's going to provide insights about how students should be oriented to adopt online and blended learning. The fourth panel member is Mr. Sujit Jayaprakash. He's our colleague. Now he's the director and business head of New Edge Infotech, that is NIT Ghana, which is a very famous brand in Ghana. It has been the pioneer of IT education in the country. He's a very motivated business development professional with a strong background in IT training and administration, with more than a decade experience in education sectors in various countries in India, Africa, and Latin America, with significant experience in senior management roles, and also leading institutional academic delivery improvements. Recently, Sujit has completed the Doctor of Philosophy in Computer Science and specialized in education data mining. So very soon, Mr. Sujit will be Dr. Sujit. And he's also a certified Microsoft trainer and a Microsoft certified professional developer. Because of wide experience of Sujit in this region of Africa, and because he has worked with different institutions, he has a good exposure with the educators in this region. So he'll be talking about the question, are educators accepting online and blended teaching in Africa? What are the fears and challenges for educators? So with this, I'm requesting to start the webinar from the first panelist, where Ms. Nodumo should feel free to share the screen and should start giving us insights about how to accelerate online and blended teaching and learning. So I'm handing it over to Ms. Nodumo now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Anand. I hope you can all hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. So this afternoon, I'll give a presentation. The outline will be, I'll just briefly talk about online teaching versus blended teaching and learning. Then I will discuss where African universities are concerning online learning and blended teaching and learning. Then I will discuss what needs to happen. I'll also briefly talk about what we are doing as the Association of African Universities, and then I will conclude. So to share my screen, let me just share my screen. I hope my screen is visible. Okay, thank you very much. Online teaching and learning, I thought we could just contrast the two so that we ensure we are all on the same table. So online teaching and learning is largely web-based. It's online, it happens online. Blended teaching and learning is a combination of face-to-face and web-based teaching and learning. Online teaching and learning is technology assisted, and blended teaching and learning is partly technology assisted. Both of them can be synchronous or asynchronous. Online teaching is strictly remote. It happens remotely, but blended teaching and learning happens partly remote. Both of them use a virtual learning management system or some type of virtual learning management system, and both of them require that the students have learning devices to assist them using technology. So where are African universities in terms of online teaching and learning or blended teaching and learning? So what we are seeing pre-COVID, before COVID-19, our education system was already challenged. the challenges that existed pre-COVID really did exist. So the challenges are not new. So pre-COVID, there were no strategies for implementing online blended teaching and learning in our universities. And there was limited or no information on how students access internet from home. So we see that universities did not have this information concerning how their students access internet from home. Pre-COVID, our universities were not subscribing to their NRENs. NRENs are National Research and Education Networks, and they exist in most African countries. Their purpose is to support the provision of internet or affordable internet to universities. So we also see poor campus infrastructure in most of our universities. Pre-COVID, online learning is viewed as a nice to have, not a necessity, but a nice to have. Pre-COVID, our universities in Africa exhibit limited skills and experiences running online or blended programs. Unfortunately, we also saw that there were individual efforts at a national level. We did not see our universities come together to say, can we work together maybe to host a joint learning management system? Can we collaborate to make sure that we make this online or blended teaching and learning work? So during COVID, as an association and as professionals in this area, we see our universities were caught unawares, rather they were caught with their pants down, and they have limited time to plan and implement. We actually did a survey of universities in Africa, and we asked specific questions. One of the top things that the universities told us that they are challenged because they have limited time to plan and implement. We also see that during COVID, our universities are trying to institutionalize the use of learning management systems. Our research tells us that the majority of universities in Africa have the Moodle learning management system, but it was not institutionalized. It was a choice. You decided whether to use it or not to use it. They are grappling with emergency training. They are trying to train their staff. They are talking of training their students, and everything is sort of happening at the same time. They are struggling to communicate to their students because students have gone back to their rural areas. And also universities are confused by many private sector players offering to help them. So they don't know who to trust and what is good for them. So what needs to happen? From our perspective as an association, we need a multi-stakeholder approach in terms of partnerships and the solutions to be provided to the universities. Most important, we need leadership to drive the change process. We need our governments at the forefront, our institutional leaders, and also leadership at an individual level. We need, of course, investments for strong national and campus infrastructure for affordable connectivity. You will be aware that internet coverage in Africa is improving, but largely the infrastructure within countries is still very poor. So we need a lot of investment to ensure that the most remote villages are also covered in terms of internet. We need a recognition of online degrees by our national regulatory agencies. We need large-scale institutional, national, and regional training for academics and students. We actually need to train thousands of academic staff and thousands of students, and train them quickly, train them effectively, and train them efficiently. The process of digitizing content must also begin. What we see is universities and professors reluctant to use some of the ready content. They want to use their contextualized content, but we think that if those who want to align existing content, they should be able to do so. Those who want to redesign their own content for online learning, they should also have that opportunity. We must prioritize sharing online learning platforms. What we see in our universities, we see individual efforts, maybe because of institutional pride, institutional culture, but we think there's an opportunity to share so that those who have no capacity can also benefit. We also need to start initiatives where students get devices to use for online learning or blended learning. Some universities are actually including this as part of the technology fees, so that when the students join a university, they get some kind of a device. As the Association of African Universities, representing over 400 members across the continent, we've been doing a number of things. One, we are lobbying African governments for these changes to happen. We've partnered with regional research and education networks, that is Ubuntu Net Alliance in Eastern Southern Africa, Western Central African Research and Education Network for Western Central, Arab States Research and Education Network in North Africa. These institutions are critical for supporting NRENs so that we address the connectivity issue. We are also engaging university leaders, running webinars for academic faculty. We are brokering partnerships to support universities to quickly move online. We are also partnering for training. For example, we partnered with OER Africa to do 4 webinars on how to teach online, how to know if teaching or learning is going on. We are also currently running a faculty online modular training program between June and August 2020. We are also piloting a virtual Moodle training program for a university in Zimbabwe between 26 May and 10 July 2020. We want to learn what is required for us to deliver this training at a large scale. In conclusion, the universities are learning a great deal from COVID-19. We are learning that necessity is the mother of inventions. We used to push universities in this direction, but it looks like they were not ready, but a pandemic is what has made them ready. We need to devise funding mechanisms, and I believe in Africa funding her own development. Before we go out asking for money, we need to look within ourselves and actually fund our own development programs. We must not forget equity and inclusiveness. How do we address those learners that don't have access? We are seeing our governments going back to reinstate radio lessons, TV lessons. we see an opportunity also with WhatsApp voice notes and podcasts. We need to do things at a large scale. I think this is the most important message that I have. Let's not do things at a small scale, but let's do things at a large scale. Let's work on our infrastructure, particularly last mile solutions. Let's do capacity building at a large scale. Let's deploy learning management systems and get universities to share. Let's digitize the content. Thank you very much, Dr. Anand.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nodumo. That was actually an excellent presentation. And I actually 100% agree to all the points which you have made. It was wonderful. I can just mention some points which I have noted down, which are very significant points. Like, we all know education sector is not ready here. And the points which you have made, which is a very, very critical point, is the need for change in culture. Because there is a need for change, not only to bring up the infrastructure, not only for training. In the presentation, once you mentioned, how can we change our culture here in the education sector so that we can go and accelerate the adoption of online teaching and learning, which is a very good point. I like that point a lot. Then there's a need for training and funding mechanism. Then what I like a lot in the presentation is that you're talking about how can Africa become self-sustainable without looking for funds and help from outside? There are so many African countries, there are so many people who are very expert, experienced, and they are capable of developing others. So we should not look outwards. Within Africa, there's a lot of resource available. We can do resource sharing. I like that point a lot. And we can be self-sustainable in Africa here. And we have to help each other and build the capacity. I think this is spot on. This is what we need to do. So it was a very insightful, with a lot of learning from your presentation, Ms. Nodumo. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
May I request Dr. Fred now, so that we can hear from Dr. Fred about the government and about the regulators. And we are looking forward for a good set of learning from Dr. Fred also. Dr. Fred, over to you. Dr. Fred, your mic is off. Can you please switch on your mic? Yeah.
Okay, I thought you were controlling the mic, so I left it to you.
Sorry for that.
Good afternoon. I'm excited to be here among such distinguished panelists. Let me put up my presentation here. So I have the privilege of talking to you about the role of regulators and government in this new technology age that COVID-19 sprang on us. It will interest you to know that before COVID, we were already talking about the future of online education. And talking about it because Africa tends to be the last to make such moves. But if you look at the way technology is evolving and the challenges we have collectively as developing nations, the need to educate our population, the need to develop the infrastructure to help do that, you would think we should actually be moving towards online as quickly and as fast as possible. But that has not been the case. It has not been the case because the regulatory framework itself has not encouraged that. So what I thought I would do today is to address some of the concerns of the stakeholders, the concerns of the regulators and government, and how do we go forward from here. Okay? Does that sound like a plan? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, Dr. Fred, it's very good. Please go ahead.
Okay, so what are the concerns of the stakeholders? In my own dealings with regulatory bodies, sometimes it's difficult to figure out whether it's regulation for the sake of quality improvements or regulation to create barriers. A lot of private universities in Ghana and perhaps in other parts of Africa are confronted with that. And we are confronted in that for many reasons. Often we are not well represented on these bodies. Often these bodies are heavily represented by public institutions that make regulations around what works best for them. So in the past, when our public universities have achieved a certain number of PhDs in their universities, then the regulatory framework that they are overrepresented on start mandating PhD as a terminal degree for you to teach in colleges. So it wasn't particularly fair because one, the public university themselves were not producing enough PhDs for us to hire. But they have a lot of resources to send folks out abroad to get PhDs to come back to their institutions. So while private universities are struggling to find funding to run their institutions, stakeholders within the public sectors that are represented or overrepresented on the regulatory bodies decide what is in vogue. So the feeling was always, are they there to really help us? Is the intent to help private universities survive and grow, or is the intent to stifle us? So those are key concerns of stakeholders in the private sector. The second is the maintenance of status quo. When we first started exploring possibilities of moving online, one of the things that came up fast and furious was that this country doesn't accept degrees obtained online. So part of the uphill battle for us who have the technology, for us who believe that the future of this continent could best be enhanced by online education, also need to work hard to change the prevailing mental models that says that once you change the medium of education or how it's delivered, somehow it doesn't have the same status as what happens in the rooms, the four corners of academia. So I know there are many more concerns from stakeholders, but in the interest of time, let's move on to the concerns of regulators and government. They are worried that most of the universities that offer online programs are in it for the money. You don't need heavy physical structure investments. With a computer, you can essentially have teachers sitting anywhere in the world and delivering an online education. So it's a money gambit. Okay. Other stakeholders or regulators that I've spoken to are worried about money moving, people moving high-end foreign reserves into foreign countries, into Nicaragua, into Venezuela, in an attempt to get a degree, because degrees in this part of the world are often quite prestigious. Then there's also the concern of the questionable offshore providers themselves. Are these institutions that are offering online degrees simply degree mills, or they have rigorous and robust processes in place to make sure that the kinds of degrees and programs they are offering can match what similarly placed institutions could have with students on campus rather than online? So are they degree mills? And some of these are quite legitimate concerns. Now, the absence of a regulatory framework. How do we know that degrees that are coming online are as good as the degrees that we provide from the classrooms? Then there is no data. I mean, most of these online providers, and I'm talking about online providers, have kind of shifted a little bit away from we transitioning to online as a result of COVID. Because the same prevailing issues that the stakeholders have, we will see those coming up again. what I have realized in this last 3 months is that online came about as necessity rather than something that anybody was prepared for. And so the regulators were quite mute. They were quite mute for the first 2.5 months as private institutions and public institutions transitioned slowly towards the online. And they never said anything until forward in the last 3 weeks. They said, can you send us your COVID-19 strategy? Can you send it to us? So we were all taken unawares. Private, public, regulators, nobody was prepared for this Second World War style emergency where students still needed to be taught. As Americans, we say we were all caught with our pants down, okay? So where do we go from here? I think that the concerns that we as stakeholders in higher ed have, as well as what government and regulators have, are essentially the same. Fear seems to be one of the biggest things that regulators tend to fear, the fear of what they don't know. They are also afraid because they work within regulatory frameworks. They are policy frameworks. And these frameworks are not necessarily frameworks that they put in place. They are frameworks that they have inherited, and they are just implementers of such frameworks. And so when new things like COVID-19 comes unawares, nobody knows what the alternative is. The only alternative they know is what is written and what they regulate us to. So I think going forward, the ability of the private sector, especially institutions that offer online, working in conjunction with the regulators and policymakers, whether in ad hoc committees or in working committees, to really figure out where the future is headed in terms of higher education and what the role of online or blended education is going to be. Even in the absence of a global epidemic or war, where do we need to go? Because this is a technology that is coming, it's evolving, it's taking its place. A crisis such as what we had enhances it. So it is the new normal, it is the new reality that we all have to wake up to. And sooner than later is the time to start having these conversations. And sometimes regulators and government policymakers need input. They need to be educated. And we need to find the right media to engage them. So institutions like the African Association of Universities are quite prominent. Council of Independent Universities in Ghana have a lot of clout because they are represented by most of the private universities in Ghana. And I think government will listen if we engage them. We need to continuously develop white papers and make sure that stakeholders are getting access to these white papers and reviewing them, that online education is not going to swallow us up. Online education is going to augment what we have and take us to the next step. That people in the rural areas do not have to travel to cities in order to have quality education. If you have good internet infrastructure, people can have education exactly where they are. And that could also help with this urban rural migration. If people can have education locally while they are working, they definitely wouldn't want to move into the cities. I think it goes without saying, as I indicated earlier, that sometimes the interaction with regulators is adversarial. Are they regulating us because of quality assurance, or are they regulating us by setting up barriers that will prevent us from adopting technologies that they are not comfortable with? So how do we break this ice and see each other as strategic partners, that the interests of the people we represent is the same? We want quality education, and we want everybody to have access to it in a medium which is a new technology. And like every single technology, it takes a while to adapt. But crisis, just as we've just gone through, helps to move the needle forward for new technologies. I think it is also useful for government stakeholders to understand that when they look at national development imperatives and they are struggling to figure out how to educate this young, teeming African population, that they have to get innovative. You can't build enough schools. and you can't build them as quickly as you would like. You need to have another means by which to reach the people that you want to educate. Some of the institutions that went into crisis mode when COVID hit were public institutions. When you have 70,000 students off campus and 22,000 students on campus, almost 100,000 students, it's going to be very difficult for you to teach them online, especially when you don't have the infrastructure that has anticipated a crisis such as this. So helping national development stakeholders to understand that this could augment the absence of brick and mortar, and that if it is properly done and deployed, it will augment higher ed, primary education, secondary education, and that there is really nothing to fear. I think having that kind of engagement will help. You know, one of the things that I have experienced is coming back is, look, a fish only knows how to swim. When you take a fish out of water, it dies. Most of our stakeholders and policymakers went through the brick and mortar institutions just like we did. And when you engage them on online education, they will turn around and say the best education is the one that you are sitting in the classroom, the one that you can build relationships with other people in the classroom. The whole essence of it is not for you to get a piece of paper and go home, but to build relationships that will last a lifetime. And the virtual world cannot guarantee that. So how do we begin to shift these mental models? That online doesn't necessarily have to be holistically online. It could be blended. That technology in the online space is just at its infancy. There is going to be a time when you will sit in your house and still feel like you are sitting in the classroom with everybody else. But until we start to adapt it and to take the necessary baby steps, we will never get to the point where online education actually feels like brick and mortar. So we need to help shift these mental models. Now, the second to last point here is a unified approach. Trying to get stakeholders and policymakers to adopt and implement online or blended education is not going to be the forte of one single institution. Academic City will not be able to do that alone. BlueCrest College will not be able to do that alone. What we need is a united front. And that united front can be led by organizations that we're already members of, the African Association, it's ASU, right? Association of African Universities, Council of Independent Universities, and many, many similar such institutions that can, in a unified way, you know, engage these key stakeholders. And if we take advantage of that critical mass of people advocating for the same thing, highlighting the importance of it, driving it as effectively as possible, and showing results for it, I think we'll be able to move the bar, just move things forward for online and blended education. Now, we need to also figure out, there are so many online tools out there. You know, my kids are using WhatsApp, they're using Zoom. Sometimes I'm looking for homework that was placed on WhatsApp, and the next day I'm looking for it in Google Classroom, and I'm completely hypnotized, you know? And then I begin to understand that being an engineer can be a limitation also, because I want to go to one single place and get that information. And sometimes I'm all over the place, and when I get frustrated, I send an email to the teacher and say, where can I find today's homework? So there is also a need for us to have standardized infrastructure on which these technologies are based. If I am hypnotized, I can tell you that regulators and development experts and government agencies will be actually more hypnotized. You know, so we need to standardize this for them. We need to make it transparent enough so that they can have access to the data itself. In Ghana, for instance, every year we are required by NTCE, National Council on Tertiary Education, to provide statistics for our students. How many students do you have in School of Business? How many students do you have in Communication Arts, Engineering? And then how many are male? How many are female? How many are foreign students? How many are local students? Now, this information should be already online for them to have access to. We shouldn't have to fill Excel sheets every year. 128 universities and colleges each year sending this information. So what we need to keep in mind also, that online education requires certain accessories. And until stakeholders can have access, stakeholders and regulators can have access to those things, they're going to be hesitant because they only know what they know, which is give us paper, we're going to push the papers. But we need to standardize it. We need to make it easier. We need to make it accessible. We need to make it transparent. We need to be able to collect data that they can also consume. You know, a BlueCrest should not be offering an online program that is entirely different from what we are offering. I know that universities sometimes want to differentiate, but you can also differentiate on standardized platforms. So I think if we retire our own concerns as stakeholders, if we can support government and the regulators and the policymakers to retire some of their concerns, then I think we have a way forward. Because look, Darwin said, you evolve or you die. And I'm saying you innovate or you die. That's what we are today. Online education is here to stay. It has become a tool of necessity. It was an option which was too easy for regulators to accept. It has now become a must-have because those who make the decisions what higher ed ought to be in Africa, in the developing world, are experiencing the consequences of their own inabilities to reach out to their students in these times of crisis. And the institutions that appear to be doing well are already the private universities who were advocating to have online components to their offering. So I think now and not later is the best time for us to have a united front to help the policymakers to shape the higher education landscape and to integrate it into our development imperatives. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fred. Thank you very much. A lot of very important learning points we have actually gathered from the talk from Dr. Fred. The point about the need for regulators to think beyond finances and beyond the financial gain is very important. And Dr. Fred also talked about the regulation of the quality of online degrees, which is very important. Need for comparative data and the need for working committees to work in this particular front. I don't think there is any other way. This is the only way we have to do. And that is why the point about the need for a united front, which Dr. Fred has mentioned multiple times in the speech. The need for united front is very important. As rightly said, no one institution can actually make an impact alone. We all have to join hands to work with the regulation and government so that they start listening and they start getting transformation now. So they have to be transformed and we are here to support them in that also. The need for standardized infrastructure is very important. But Dr. Fred, the most impactful sentence which I liked from your presentation is the details about mental models. When you talk about mental models, I think this actually is the key. When we want to do any kind of change or transformation, this is the key to the change and transformation. With the regulations and with the government also. In addition to the regulation and government, actually, we need to talk about our mental models about education, about teaching, about learning. And when we talk about mental models and we start educating all the stakeholders, that there are different ways and means of learning and education also, not only traditional classroom setting, then I think we will be able to get the good solutions. So thank you very much again, Dr. Fred, for these important points. Now we are in the middle of this webinar. I have actually framed some short questions through a poll. So I'm launching a poll now on Zoom. So please respond to these 4 polling questions. This polling will be on for some time. And after a minute or so, I will invite the third panel member, Miss Liz from UK. She will be talking about how students can get prepared for online and blended learning. We have seen in various institutions, then when institutions shift to online teaching and learning or blended teaching and learning, the resistance came a lot from the students because students are not ready. They're not ready mentally. They're not ready with the devices. They're not ready with the kind of their learning culture. So Ms. Liz is going to talk about the students' perspective and how can we help the students so that they can readily accept the online and blended learning approaches. So it's over to Ms. Liz. Ms. Liz, please feel free to start.
Thank you, Dr. Anand, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to be thinking about what happens when students start university, in the sense that they have a greater responsibility than they have been used to for looking after their own education, as it were. So although they're expected to be independent, you've got students who are sometimes struggling with organising themselves, sometimes worrying about falling behind, or maybe not even appreciating how independent their study needs to be, and that can then be exacerbated by online learning. So students who are already not feeling very secure will start to feel more insecure once they get online. Now, this is a great opportunity for flipped teaching, where the material is provided in advance. So if a student is going to be attending a seminar or a lecture online, to have the material in advance and try and make sense of it themselves first means that when they come to the online learning, they have already engaged with the material, and the online learning is then a consolidation or a clarification for them. But whatever happens, the responsibility is going to migrate even more towards the student, and enable them to engage in critical thinking. Now, for some students, that is more scary. So that's why we're meeting more resistance to moving online. So let's think about what some of the issues are. From a practical point of view, we've already said that learners have to feel ready to work more independently. They're going to have less accessibility to lecturers, so they're going to feel more distanced from the institution that they have been attending. And the learning environment may not feel as supportive. Many students appreciate the community value of being with other learners. You may also have some learn by peering over to the notes of the person sitting next to them, or asking a question of the person sitting next to them to help them to appreciate what's going on. So that quick clarification from a peer may not be so readily available either. And also online, they become more afraid to ask questions. So it may be that once they come offline, that they then don't have sufficient understanding to be able to move forward from there. They can't follow up the work without anybody else to talk to about the problem that they have. So we're looking at a different psychology, really, of what's happening for the students when they're not on campus. So from a personal point of view for the students, we're looking very much at the pupil's mindset. That's going to be key. How much do they believe in their own ability? Generally speaking anyway, but of course, if they start out believing that being online is going to make it harder for them, then that will automatically provide a block that will limit what they're able to achieve. Learners have natural preferences for the way that they take in information. So you're going to have some who will enjoy online learning, but there would be plenty who don't. And one of the biggest issues is the potential for greater distraction. Students are less likely to study for longer. If you think about the fact that they've come off offline and then would normally, if they've been attending a lecture, would then maybe go with a group to go and have a coffee, and they'll discuss the lecture, they'll consider what the things that they understood, the things that maybe they're still thinking about, and they'll support each other that way. Or maybe some will pair up to go and study together, or maybe they'll go and access the library, do some silent work. But if they're not on campus, those things are not available to them. So it's going to be much more difficult for follow-up work. Once the lecture is over, if it's been online, it may well be that they don't go to follow that up straight away. Solutions, in general terms, I think it's important to address the student concerns before blended learning starts taking place. We know that some of them are resistant, and it's a good idea to acknowledge the difficulties that they're having and to talk to them and prepare them for it. And I think, again, we shouldn't presume that they have a clear idea of how to study independently. Some may still need more guidance on that, even more so with the blended and online learning. It sounds very basic, but for some, they might still need the encouragement to create the ideal workspace, or create their own timetable, or allow more time to reflect from what they would normally do. And so we might also need to teach them how to ask more effective questions of themselves. Questions like, what do I need to know? How much of it do I know already? Where am I going with this? What outcome am I trying to achieve from this? How will I find information? Because that's what helps them work on their own step by step, is by asking those questions and answering them for themselves. But some feel a sense of confusion because they're not sure how to ask themselves those questions. We may also need to supply a support pathway if they are stuck. We know that their whole days and weeks can be lost by a student who is stuck with something and doesn't know where to go or is afraid to ask for help with it. And we don't want them wasting time like that. So particularly if they're online without access to the institution as much, we would need to set up a step-by-step process that they could use if they were in need of support. We may also need to help them learn more effective note-taking. We don't want them to just take the notes and then leave it at that. They need to recognise the need to make the content of what they have learnt their own, which is much harder to do if they're isolated while they're learning. And I think one thing that would help with this is if we were to provide a big picture each time of where the topic fits within their degree programme. Where does the topic fit within the degree? Where does it fit within that module? So that they mentally can be making links already to where that topic is going to go and how it fits with everything else that they're learning. The other thing is to help teach them strategies for overcoming stress, because learning on their own is more stressful and it's more easy to get overwhelmed, and therefore teaching them strategies that will help them to overcome that stress and overwhelm so they know what to do and how to do it when that particular situation comes up. So thinking about more specific solutions, it's really helpful if students understand how their brain actually works, how it learns. If they're going to take personal responsibility for what's going on inside here, what's physically happening and what impact they can have on their own minds, then they really should be knowing more about how that works. The brain's designed to work via a feedback loop from personal experience, and the issue with even face-to-face learning as well as with online learning is that the student is not actually having an experience, they're only receiving information. So it's really important that students understand that when they go away from a lecture or a seminar, that they have to create that experience for themselves from what has been provided. And students are often unaware of the way that the brain works in this way, and therefore they don't always recognise the importance of repetition and practice. We all know this type of student who reaches a point where they feel like they've failed at something, and they see that as a blockage, whereas in fact it's the starting point. It's the block they need to get over by repetition and practice and more research and so on. And we need to help make them more resilient, because this is going to be more of a problem if they are online or have come offline and then start to work independently and are not sure about what's needed. So the idea of learning to fail is actually quite, it helps to make them more resilient, and we're looking for them to be more resilient if we're going to use blended learning. We require a change in student psychology, really. They need to be even less passive and even more active, and that all needs addressing before the blended learning starts. So just finally, to think about what students can do if they are working online and the lecture or the seminar has finished and they come offline. Instead of being distracted, what we could encourage them to do is support their own learning by doing something straight away. Just thinking about the fact that some students need visual or practical ways of doing things to help them consolidate what they're trying to achieve. I'm thinking of the fact that I've had people tell me that they did not apply for university because they felt that their particular way of learning didn't suit the university's way of doing things. And that, for me, that's quite sad. So I think we should make it explicit that it's okay to study in their own way. We know that we will give them instructions on what the end result should look like, what they're aiming for, but as they're doing their study, there's no reason why they can't do it their own way. I'll give you, for instance, the student I spoke to recently was telling me that he felt that his normal way of studying, which was to draw little pictures, was not to be used in university because it seemed too childish. So for 2 years, he struggled with his university course, and finally, in the 3rd year, decided to go back to his little pictures to help him, and managed to pass his degree by doing that, but wished he had started earlier. I think we need to make it clear that studying their own way is actually a valid way of learning, as long as they come up with the correct end result. One example of that, just to kind of finish on a practical note, is if when they've come offline, if they're encouraged straight away to consider what the key words were from the lecture that they've just listened to, and to make sure that they understand the definition for each of those key words. They can write them out on cards. This is a method that I use quite a lot. They write the keywords on the cards, and they make sure that the definitions for them are written on the back. So it means if they haven't understood the definition for that word, they need to go away and find it. So they end up with all the keywords from the lecture on the table in front of them. And then they can start moving them around and creating a flow chart on the table from those keywords. And then it becomes obvious where they need to start, because they might be able to link a few of the words over here. They might be able to link a few more words over here, but there's a gap in the middle. And that's where they really need to base their research. So they've got a visual and practical hands-on way of identifying where they need to go from there. Which gives them more confidence about being able to get started on a particular piece of work after an online session that they might not have been used to. So I'm aware that my presentation hasn't had any visuals. So if anybody would like a copy of my notes, if you'd like to email me at learningpocketsuk, that's learningpocketsuk, all one word, @gmail.com, and I'm happy to attach my notes to give you some guidance on what I've been saying here. I'd like to also mention that I'm currently writing an online course for release around about September, specifically for students who struggle with feelings of not being good enough and being lost in relation to the concept of independent learning. So if anyone would like some input to that, I'd really appreciate people's comments on what they feel should be in that course. And you could leave a message for me on my website, which is lizkeable.com, or message me on LinkedIn if you have any further questions on this or would like to talk to me about the course. Thank you, Dr. Anand.
Thank you, Ms. Liz. And very important points were discussed by Ms. Liz. Ms. Liz talked about the visual and practical ways. You know, online learning, as far as we have seen, and the blended approach has more affordance, or there's more possibility of practicing experiential learning and student-centered learning as compared to face-to-face teaching and learning. And Madam Liz has actually focused on the concepts of experiential learning and student-centered learning. Traditionally, the countries which are not so exposed to modern teaching methods and modern learning methods, these universities and institutions are focusing more on traditional way of teaching and learning by lecturing and some examples and some discussions. But more progressive institutions around the world have already shifted to experiential and student-centered learning methods, where the focus is on practical and hands-on learning. But also it is noticed that it is not easy to shift to new methods of teaching and learning because it requires a lot of training, a lot of hand-holding of students, because students actually have also no exposure. So the first point which Ms. Liz made is about how students can be made independent is very important. How to train the students, how to orient the students. The need for coming up with a psychological change in the students is very important. And we need to hold the hands of the students, support them, orient them, train them in a very conducive manner, attract them for online and blended teaching and learning, which is basically is very different from offline teaching and learning. Many educators think that online teaching and learning is just keeping your offline material in a website. Let the students go through the PowerPoint slides which I present in the class and we'll discuss on Zoom, done. But no, that is not online teaching and learning and blended teaching and learning, right? So there is a need to understand the concept of experiential learning, student-centered learning, as Ms. Rania M. Rafiq is saying in the chat, flip teaching and learning, for example, right? So there are a lot of good points coming in the chat also. If you see the chat messages, there are a lot of participants here who are very qualified to talk about these particular aspects. And I'm very glad to see active participation of all the participants. They're very active on chats. You can see there are a lot of question answers also there. I'm requesting the panel members to please go through the question answer tabs and start answering the questions which are raised by the participants. So the change of psychology of the students is again a very big point, a very good important point made by Ms. Liz. Thank you, Ms. Liz, for all these input. We will be in touch with you and good luck for your online course you're making.
Thank you.
The next panel member is Mr. Sujit, who is the director for InfoEdge, which is an IT. And the topic for Mr. Sujit is about educators because of his vast experience in different institutions with different educators in different countries and a lot of exposure in Africa. So specifically, what are the challenges and fears of the African educators when it comes to online and blended teaching and learning? This is the topic Mr. Sujit is going to talk about. So over to you, Mr. Sujit.
Thank you, Dr. Anand. So first of all, I would like to thank BlueCrest and Association of African Universities for organizing this wonderful webinar and also for me as a panel member in this discussion. I feel much elated to share the screen space with Dr. Fred, Ms. Nodumo, and Ms. Liz. And as a matter of fact, I think I've not left with anything to share now because Dr. Fred and Ms. Nodumo has touched everything, like the challenges, opportunities, everything what Africa is facing, what the educator is facing. So it's kind of like I've gone blank now. So however, let me share my slide just as, before I would start my presentation. Yeah. So Also, before I would like to start, I would like to commend all the lecturers and the other members in the academic fraternity for tirelessly working day and night these days to conduct the classes online, because uh, these are not normal times. And I know that educators, university professors, lecturers, everybody is struggling hard to suddenly to make a move from a traditional teaching and learning to an online. It wasn't an easy move, but then I think everybody is coping up with that wonderfully. So I would like to appreciate everyone for that. So my topic here is, are educators, yeah, are educators accepting online and blended teaching in Africa? So, though I'm not an African, but being in Africa for past 10 years and working in the education sector, I guess I can answer this question. So, yes, educators across the Africa are accepting online and blended learning, blended teaching. So, also ever since the COVID outbreak has happened, we see that even the kindergarten and primary schools have moved to online education, and it is being accepted by everyone, being a parent or a student. Everybody has accepted this online learning mode. So I actually shared this topic with few of my trainers and academic heads in various institutions in Ghana. So their response was also the same. Online and blended learning or a blended education is gradually becoming a norm worldwide, and Africa inclusive, right? So for all of us here, online education is not a new thing, but it may be a new thing for kids who are in the school, or for those who are in the universities. But we, the educators here, I don't think online education is a new thing. Everyone here, I think we have over 100 participants here. I'm sure every one of us must have tried our hands in online learning, right? If not online teaching. So it's not a new thing though. So this is another example I just wanted to show. Sorry, Dr. Anand, for copying this. So when Dr. Anand shared this poll, this has just happened within like 10 seconds. Within 10 seconds, if you see, almost like 15 people said that they are confident with online blended and teaching, and 9 people said that they are somewhat confident, and 0% said that they are not at all confident. So this should answer the question that whether Africa is ready to go for this online or blended teaching. Another thing which I wanted to show with you all is that if you see the screen, these are some of the top online universities in Africa. For example, University of Africa, Zambia, which was established in 1965. They started online programs way back. WITS Plus University, University of Rwanda, Ahmed Bello University in Nigeria, African Virtual Universities, Kenyatta Digital School of Learning. There are so many other universities which are offering online courses these days. So UNICAF is also, I saw that somebody has been sharing information about UNICAF here. So all these are some of the top online universities in Africa. So this tells the fact that online education is not a new thing in Africa, and everybody is accepting it. Just that, as Dr. Fred rightly mentioned, the regulatory bodies should come in front and then put some regulations on board so that every university can start offering these online programs. So another thing is I don't know how many of you know that the first online university in Africa was founded in 1996 as a project of the World Bank to improve cyber education in Africa. I think this project has been shelved due to some reasons. However, the idea of bringing online education to Africa happened way back, that is in 1996. Also, since I'm from Ghana, so the first time when online education or a distance learning happened in Ghana was in 1996, when UEW admitted its first batch of distance education students. Similarly, 2001 and 2, University of Ghana and Cape Coast started diploma programs in a distance mode. So, which also tells you that this thing is not a new thing for us. These days, especially this COVID has pushed everybody to go online, educators to go online. And we all knew that these are some of the tools which are used by most of the educators here. Zoom, which you all know. Dr. Fred also mentioned that his kids are taking Zoom classes. I see that a lot of private schools are using Zoom. We are all so dependent on this synchronous learning mode these days. Google Meet is another one, Microsoft Teams, Cisco WebEx, a whole lot of tools out there which educators are using to teach online. Similarly, the learning management systems, for example, Moodle, Sakai, Google Classroom, Blackboard, these are all also, all these are also used by the educators to upload their contents, to share their assignments, to conduct online exams. So there are various tools used these days, and thanks to COVID for exposing all these things at a go. However, the painful part is that still majority of our lecturers, majority of our educators, they rely on WhatsApp to teach. That's the painful thing. Although there is Zoom, although there is Google Meet, we still see that educators share their contents, or lecturers share their contents through WhatsApp, send voice notes, share assignments. Everything is through WhatsApp these days. Majority of them, I'm not pointing out everyone, majority of them are doing this. So the reasons for this, we'll look at into the fears and challenges what the educators are facing. The reason is simple. The major challenge what Africa is facing today is data and the electricity. That's what majority of them are facing. So first and foremost, it's a lack of proper resources like learning management system. Not every private college or not every university is having an LMS. Very few have their own LMS. Even very few have a proper student management system these days. And they don't have servers. None of the buildings are connected to each other. There is no network. There is no internet bandwidth. There is a lack of electronic gadget. You cannot expect every lecturer to have a laptop these days. Although, yes, they have to carry a laptop when they're going to the classes, but it's kind of, it's not happening, right? So these are some of the challenges why some of the educators are not able to go to online classes or move to online classes. The next thing is like fear of change in moving from a traditional teaching to online teaching and learning. Again, I would like to copy what Dr. Fred rightly said, that fish knows only to swim, right? If you take it out of the water, it will die. So it's a kind of fear from moving from a traditional environment. People have been used to it. People have experienced this for a while. So something new, it's not easy for anybody to accept. So that's the problem what most of the educators are facing. And the lack of interest among students in attending online classes. Again, over this, out of this 100 people, if you ask some of them who are teaching online, definitely they'll give you this as an answer, that the lack of interest among students in attending online classes and the increasing excuses due to data and electricity, all these are not the motivating factor for the lecturer to go online. And it also implies to the faculties as well. They all face challenges with the electricity here in this country, or even, for example, Nigeria, if you take, electricity is a big issue, even other countries too. And also the data cost. If you look at some of the developed countries or some of the countries which has huge population, the data is not that expensive. But here, yes, data is expensive. If you have to conduct a 2 hour of online lectures, you will end up spending somewhere around $3. So that's a big, that's a cost for a faculty. So it's not an easy thing for him to spend. Lack of policies and procedures on how to conduct online classes. We all talk about moving online, experiential education, flipped classroom. Yes, it is there, but where are the policies and procedures for this? We lack policies and procedures in this country. Lack of training or lack of technological assistance and experience for non-IT faculties in conducting online classes. There's another thing. People who are teaching communication, people who are teaching fashion, you cannot expect them to be tech savvy. So they definitely struggle with their they definitely struggle with electronic gadgets and stuff. So there is a lack of training. As Ms. Nodumo rightly mentioned, you need to train thousands and thousands of people before we move into online. So from the educator perspective, this is also another fear or a challenge which everybody is facing, and lack of adequate time frame to implement online classes. For example, ever since this COVID thing happened, um, all the universities has pushed their lecturers or the professors to go online and teach, and it's not easy to put all your contents and then go for a 2 hour of online session. It requires a whole lot of um, work, right? So they have to prepare their materials beforehand. And here is the case, they are not getting enough time. They are not getting adequate time to do this. And the increased time required for both online contacts and preparation of materials and activities against the same point. And inability to provide hands-on experience to the students. Sorry, it's inability to provide hands-on experience. For example, I have received this complaint from some of the students who are learning fashion that when you move online, for example, especially the skill-based programs, how are you going to conduct practical classes for them? So that is another challenge what the educator is facing. Increasing deferments due to the anxiety issues and uncertainty among students. So these are all the challenges which directly or indirectly affects a teacher or a professor who is teaching an online class. And lack of policies in student assessments. For example, now we don't know, even any private college if you take or public institutions, they have not put out the proper policies to conduct a student assessment or how to go online, how to teach online. So these are all some of the challenges which an educator is facing. Increasing pressure from administrators to other academic timelines. Yes, so every university follows a particular timeline, and the lecturer or professor has to follow these timelines what the um, administrators have put out there. From the educator's point of view, conducting classes online, conducting assessments online, uh, a whole lot of pressure has been mounted on them. So following, I mean, bearing this pressure and following the deadlines is strictly, it's kind of impossible these days. So these are some of the challenges and barriers what the educators are facing. And according to UNESCO, 89% of the students in sub-Saharan Africa do not have access to household computers, and 82% lack internet access. This should tell us where we are now and how long it will take for us to move into this online education. Also, the necessity of teaching and learning with asynchronous mode. So as I told you, some of these LMS like Canvas, Blackboard, we talk about flipped classroom, we talk about experiential learning, everything um, will come back. I mean, when we come back from this COVID with a much more widely shared understanding that digital tools are complements, not substitutes for the intimacy and immediacy of face-to-face learning. I think that's where people will start understanding what an experiential learning, what a flipped classroom is. For now, if we try to push them to go online, or if we try to push them to flip classroom or experiential learning, I don't think they will be able to understand. I mean, from the student's perspective. So I found this online. So I like the footer part. The world's largest learning platform today has no teachers, there's a YouTube. And the world's largest lesson provider has no classroom, that's Khan Academy. And the world's largest non-profit registered course provider has no registrar, that's edX. And the world's largest for-profit online certification provider is not accredited, which is Coursera. So this is where we are moving into. We are moving into a place where there will not be big infrastructures, university buildings, no registrar, no accreditation. Everything is going to be online. So we have to prepare ourselves. We have to prepare our mindsets to move into this. And as an educator, I request all the educators to psych your mind as per this, so that in future we'll be able to transition ourselves from this traditional model to an online model. So again, as an educator, you always need to find new ways and break the barriers, right? So thank you, Dr. Anand.
Thank you, Mr. Sujit. Sujit talked about the educators' perspectives, the fears and the challenges educators are facing at this point of time. And I think the points which are raised by Mr. Sujit are all valid points. We can see these problems and issues coming up because of lack of infrastructure, lack of electricity and power in many regions of Africa, lack of data because of the high cost of data here. And also, it's a very mixed presentation from Mr. Sujit. You know, mixed because on the one hand, we are seeing that educators are saying that they are confident. They know how to use technology. But at the same time, the infrastructure is not supporting them. At the same time, it is a felt need to provide education and support to the educators and train them on how to go for an effective online teaching and learning. Because teaching online, anybody can do, but is this teaching really high quality and effective? That is the main question, right? So the points which are made by Mr. Sujit about asynchronous teaching and learning and also about lack of students' interest, this is also a very important point here. Because of the COVID, now what is happening is that these students, they enrolled for a face-to-face education. They never enrolled for an online teaching and learning or blended teaching and learning. But now they are being forced to go for online teaching and learning. So they're not mentally ready. And they're even telling to the institutions that we enrolled and registered in your program, which is not an online program. Why should we study online with you? Right? So these are all valid points. And the presentation ended with the future. Very interesting slide, the last one, which talked about the world's largest provider has no registrar. See, all these names we all know, Coursera, edX, and how are they transforming and disrupting the education industry? So educators need to be prepared for the future while the disruptions are coming. And I heard a lot of speakers in the previous webinars where there's a lot of talk going on about how COVID actually has not disrupted, has accelerated the change in the education industry. It has not actually disrupted, but it has increased the pace of change in the education industry, which is a very valid point. So thank you, Mr. Sujit, for all these insightful points. Now we will go for question and answer sessions. But before that, I have one more poll which I want to launch for all of you, which is a feedback. So before we open for questions, I'm launching the feedback questions where you can provide the feedback to this webinar. There are only 4 questions. So please feel free to provide your input on the feedback poll, please. And I can see some raised hands here. I could see some question answers there. There's one question I want to answer now. This question is about the centers of learning. Joyce Nunhalala Vilakati asked this question, that is there a need of center of learning in the universities which can help the educators to learn? It's a very, very valid question, and I'm very glad to see this question. In BlueCrest College, we actually launched Teaching and Learning Center last month. And we actually trained all our full-time and part-time faculty members in the month of March and April when the COVID situation was here. We never forced our faculty members, full-time or part-time, to just blindly start teaching online. We provided an online learning, a training to all our full-time faculty and part-time faculty members using Moodle. And the Teaching and Learning Center at BlueCrest College is very active now, and we are ready and we are going to launch a variety of courses for educators in this region, where we are going to provide a lot of support, organized training for online and blended teaching and learning, and for effective teaching and learning practices also. And we will partner more with AAU, with Ms. Lees there in UK, and with other people who are interested to join the hands with us to take this particular initiative of transforming the region by introducing effective practices of online and blended teaching and learning. We need actually to support each other. So we will go and we'll do further actions and steps. We'll take further steps in this. This webinar is just the beginning. It's not an end. So let me see the questions, and then we will take the questions from the participants. There's a way to ask questions in the question and answer tab also. You can write the questions, but in case you want to ask questions orally, we will take about 10 minutes more time for some questions, and you can ask specific questions from our panelists here. So please raise your hands in the chatting, and I will be opening questions. I will be opening your mics to ask questions, please. Okay, so I'm asking Miss, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the gender usage of names here. So I don't know if Mrs. or Mr., but I'm just saying the name. Adeni Akinrinde. Please feel free to ask a question. Timothy Akinfenwa. You can also ask question.
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
All right, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Okay, yeah, my question is this. What do you think is the role of, hello?
Yes, please continue.
Okay, what do you think is the role of the network regulators? Okay, I'm speaking from Nigeria now, and we have the issue of high tariff rates now. How do you think that the network regulators can collaborate with institutions to bring the rate of data?
I think this question is very much suited to Dr. Fred.
Right. All right. Can I go ahead?
Yes, please, you can answer now.
All right. Well, I think this ties into the discussion about the role of stakeholders and regulators and government. In Ghana, for instance, the government reduced the electricity tariffs during the crisis. Water was delivered free to some homes that cannot pay for it. So, I don't think private institutions or universities really have the clout to tell telcos what to do. But I think governments are in a better position to negotiate for tariff reductions for tertiary and educational institutions in general. So I think this is something that you guys need to take up with your regulatory bodies. And again, as I indicated before, in times like this, when higher educations come together under umbrella organizations such as the AAU, you are in a better position to actually help government advocate better. So only government regulatory bodies can actually work with telcos to reduce this. And we have to make sure that our lawmakers are involved in this process.
Thank you. Can I go ahead with the second question?
Sure.
Should have asked the question.
Okay, sorry. My second question is that, okay, we know about this cybercrime and the likes. How do we want to check the activities of fraudsters in getting original certificates? I mean, via online teaching.
Yeah, so, in my presentation, I mentioned that we need to have a rigorous framework for how education is delivered online. I don't think it's completely different from what happens today, even offline. There are processes in place. If you go to collect your transcripts or your certificates, you have to produce your student ID. Somebody at the registrar's office has to make sure that you were the one and you attended that institution. I actually think that online gives us a better opportunity because now you can develop blockchain technologies that can actually attach people's, biometric data to their online records. So I think the future is actually bright to avoid these counterfeit certificates and transcripts than we've succeeded in doing. I mean, for many, many years, even in Africa, people were traveling with other people's passports. All you had to do was to get some unscrupulous immigration officers to swap your pictures with other people's pictures, and you could travel with their passport and visas. Now we have biometric data that renders that impossible. So I think the online and all these technologies in blockchain technologies are actually going to help us check these better. So I am not too worried that there will be fraud in this regard. If there is an online place where your employer can actually pay a little fee and then go in and run a query whether the particulars you have provided are genuine and can be authenticated online, I think that is really the future.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, can I request Timothy Akinfenwa to please ask the question?
All right, thank you very much. I'm very glad. Kudos to all the presenters. I'm calling from Nigeria. I joined the meeting from Nigeria. Nodumo, nice seeing you again. All right, so basically, I just wanted to probably give a little word on the young man, the person that called from Nigeria about tariff on data. Yeah, it would be good if regulators come together and all that. But for example, I work in a tertiary institution as well. And one of the things that we've been able to do, that we are trying to do now, is that we discover that we can actually talk to the telcos. Now, one of the two things we've been able to discover is that there have been two different approach to it. One of the approaches that the telcos are willing to allow our students have access to our learning management platforms free of charge. No, they are not going to charge the students, but the university is going to subsidize by paying the telcos, some kind of arrangement like that. That was one arrangement. The other arrangement is to have data at subsidized rate, then get the student to provide whatever line, whatever mobile line they are using for their data, and then the university credits the student for data, so that one way or the other, I mean, it's not going to be much throughout the session, but at least somehow to subsidize what the student actually uses. So the young man, the person that actually called from Nigeria, will probably, it's not really too difficult again. Once you have your money, which is the bargaining power, you can actually approach the telcos and get a fair deal. I don't know who actually talked about students not being prepared somehow. Yeah, okay. I think Ms. Liz, I really enjoy your presentation. I noticed there was one video that went viral in Nigeria when a student said, when you admitted me in school, you actually did not tell me that I'm going to be meeting lecturers online. So I'm not ready to meet lecturers online. As far as I'm concerned, once I will only join after the pandemic. So I'm not, but at the end of the day, we have to do a kind of reorientation of our students. I think they are more the stakeholder. Even if lecturers are ready to go online, are the students ready to come online, to come and actually take the lectures? So it's going to be a way, one of the solutions, whatever model, whatever thing that you think is going to work in bringing the students to that understanding that even after the pandemic, beyond the pandemic, we need to see how classes can actually go online. My own advice, Dr. Fred, that I think we should actually start pushing also alongside some of the things that you talked about, is to make sure that our government see technology as a solution, as key. They should embrace technology. That is just it. We've had cases of internet shutdowns in Africa somehow, somewhere, in some countries. You can't be having some things like this, and then you want online or blended teaching to actually kind of like progress positively. So those are my own area. The other one I wanted to talk about is the security challenges about these platforms. We know that all these platforms are also accessible. I attended one training some time ago, and it will amaze you how people actually try to circumvent the kind of things that students, I don't know, guys have actually developed to be able to actually enroll and take online exams for each other. In other words, malpractice. So how do you ensure someone? So, and that brings me to my only question. The other ones are only feedbacks. How credible are we going to ensure online assessment? If you just teach, there will be a time to have assessment. If we can't still bring the students to class, how credible our online assessment going to be? Thank you very much, panelists.
Okay, so Mr. Timothy, I think some very valid points were made by you. I have experience of online teaching and learning for over 15 years now. So when we talk about assessments, just answering your question, we first need to find out more details about the concept of assessments. When we think of assessments, our mind thinks about final exams, sitting in a classroom answering the questions. But if you see the concept of assessment in the experiential and student-centered learning approach, it's not always that. I have seen in best of the universities around the world where a student gets as an assignment the assessment for the final exam also, that the student needs to submit in 3 days and can work from home. And there are ways and means to do the plagiarism checking for that. And the education and the learning that comes from that assessment transforms the student. Because what is more important after assessment is the proper feedback which we can give to the students from where the students can learn. So there are a lot of strategies and ways and means of doing assessments also. I hope I'm answering your questions. So there are a lot of questions I have seen in the Q&A tab that talks about the need of training. There are a lot of educators in this webinar are asking about how can they get the training and how can they learn more about online and blended teaching and learning. So I'm announcing again, in BlueCrest College, we have launched the Teaching and Learning Center now, and we are now preparing some training courses for educators, and we will be getting back to all of you with those training courses. We want you to enroll. We also want you to become a co-teacher with us and teach others if you have good amount of experience of online teaching and learning. Because of the time constraints, I think if you have more questions, please feel free to write your questions to this email, and we will do our best to provide you the answers or to discuss further these issues with you. The email is there in the chat now. So I just want to now extend a vote of thanks to all the panelists and attendees here. I'm very glad with the discussions, and this is a good beginning. As I said, it's not the end, it's the beginning. We all have agreed that we need to do a lot here in a very strategic manner. We have to join hands, we have to go in depth in the issues, we have to help educators, students, we have to work with the regulators and governments, etc. So there are a lot of things we need to do in this country, in this region here, to make a positive impact. And if not the education institutions, who else can make an impact in the region? So it's our duty as educators and as players of education sector to make an impact in the region so that we can improve our quality of delivery, our quality of education in this region. And online, as Dr. Freddy is mentioning all again and again, that online and blended is the future. And as Mr. Sujit said that this is the future, are we ready for that kind of future? Ms. Liz is talking about the students, are students ready? Ms. Nodomo is talking about how the universities can set up. I am very glad with the way AAU is providing a kind of model training. I think now it's a model training, Ms. Nodomo. You are providing to one of the universities in Africa, and I can see about 40 different educators have joined hands to support this university in Africa, and all their faculty members are now getting the training on how to use Moodle for online teaching, free of cost because of the intervention from AAU. This is a great work, I think. This is the way we need to move forward, by joining hands with each other. So thank you all for your participation. Please feel free to write your questions. I'm very glad seeing this active participation. Please continue working with us. Thank you very much.